I'm Rachel Ellis, 29 years old, and the night I heard my mother whisper through the bathroom door, "Keep quiet. You'll ruin his future." I knew something inside me had shifted. I was on the cold tile floor, curled into myself, ribs aching, lungs barely working, but her voice came through like a blade, calm, practiced, and sharp with expectation. That was the moment I stopped being a daughter and started becoming something else, someone else, the kind of person who doesn't flinch anymore. Before I tell you the rest, go ahead and tap the like button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It helps more than you think. I grew up just outside Bloomington, Indiana, in a split-level house with beige siding and a front porch that my mother decorated every season. My parents, Martin and Deborah, were steady people. Small-town steady dad worked at a heating and air company for nearly 30 years. Mom stayed home, took pride in keeping the house spotless. She believed in order and quiet in keeping in. The peace, even when it cracked beneath the surface, I was the firstborn. And from the beginning, I tried to be what they needed: polite, dependable, invisible. When it helped, I folded laundry without being asked. Learned how to make Dad's coffee just right and never came home late from school when my brother Zach came along 3 years after me. The air shifted. He had this magnetic pull, loud, charming, reckless, but always forgiven. He was their son, and we were expected to revolve around him. By the time he turned 13, Dad was driving him to training camps across the state. My mother packed special meals in coolers labeled with his name. I was in the passenger seat sometimes, but no one noticed I was there. Not really if he threw a tantrum. Broke. Something punched a wall. They shook their heads and said, "Boys will be boys." If I ever raised my voice, it was a problem. I left home for college, stayed gone as long as I could, but eventually returned when my lease ended last spring. I told myself it was just self-it. Temporary, a few months to save for a down payment. But deep down, I think I still wanted something from them. Not approval, not even love, maybe just recognition that I was still part of the family, still visible. I took the guest room, the one with the twin bed and a shelf of Zach's old trophies. No one offered to help me unpack, but I made myself useful, as always. Grocery runs, dishes, laundry. Mom didn't say thank you, but she didn't criticize either, so I took that as a win. The only pictures in the living room were of Zach Sr., portraits, team photos, college games. His name came up at dinner every night like a ritual I kept to myself most evenings. Grading papers in my room or folding towels in the laundry room. Sometimes I'd hear Zach stomping down the hall, cursing under his breath, punching the wall. Again, I saw the dent once just above the light switch, and I knew it hadn't come from a fall. But I didn't ask, because in our family, asking meant accusing, and accusing meant disloyalty. Then came that Saturday. He had a game that mattered. Draft scouts were watching. We all knew that when he stormed through the front door after midnight, smelling like sweat and cheap beer. I stayed in the kitchen, head down, sponge in hand, wiping the same corner of the counter over and over. I didn't look up when he threw his bag across the floor or when he slammed the fridge shut. "What are you looking at?" he said, voice low but sharp. "Nothing." I answered without thinking. Just cleaning up, trying to disappear again. But this time, disappearing wasn't enough, and that was the moment everything began to crack. He grabbed the front of my shirt so fast, I barely registered what was happening. 1 second, I was wiping down the counter, trying to stay out of his way. The next, I was up against the granite edge, his knuckles pressed into my collarbone, breath knocked clean out of me. My feet slipped as he dragged me across the kitchen, and then the impact came hard. My ribs caught the corner of the counter, and everything inside me seemed to collapse. I hit the floor and couldn't move. I remember the cold tile against the side of my face. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. Then came the second hit. His foot driving into my side like I was just something in the way. I heard the crack before I felt it. A sickening, sharp sound that echoed louder than it should have in the stillness of the kitchen. And then it all went quiet. When I opened my eyes again, the lights looked too bright. Breathing hurt. My chest felt like it was being held together with string. My mother was kneeling beside me, but she wasn't checking my face. She was listening, head tilted toward the hallway, waiting for my father's footsteps. Her voice came low and quick. "Rachel, your dad's coming. You need to get up." I tried. My arms wouldn't cooperate. I could barely get air in. I can't breathe." I managed the words catching in my throat. Her eyes flicked to mine for half a second. No fear for me, no softness, just urgency. "You tripped," she said. "You hit the counter. That's what happened, do you hear me? You know how Zach is? This could ruin everything for him." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was already dragging myself toward the hallway, each movement making something sharp twist inside my chest. I made it to the small bathroom and locked the door behind me, slid down until I was sitting on the floor, forehead resting against the cool side of the tub. Their voices were muffled, but I could hear the rhythm of them. My father's low, steady rumble, my mother's rushed replies, Zach's door slamming upstairs. And then her voice again, clear right through the bathroom door. "Keep quiet," she said. "You'll ruin his future." The next morning I couldn't stand upright. Each breath felt jagged. My father didn't ask what happened, didn't ask how I felt, just said, "Get in the car." He didn't look at me during the drive, just kept his eyes on the road. "You fell down the stairs," he said. Not as a suggestion, not as a question, just a statement. "That's what you'll tell them. Your mother's upset. Zach's beside himself about what happened. We don't need any more drama." I nodded once without really meaning to. It was muscle memory by then. Agree, stay quiet, be good. The urgent care waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The lights buzzed overhead. A nurse took my vitals, asked what had happened. I told her what I was told to say. I fell down the stairs. The words stuck to the roof of my mouth, heavy and wrong. Then the doctor walked in. She was tall, probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back neatly, and a name tag that read Dr. Melissa Trent. She looked at the chart, then at me. Not through me the way my family always had, but at me. She moved carefully, asking permission before she touched anything. When she pressed her fingers along my side, I couldn't stop the sound that came out of me. A cry I didn't recognize as my own. "I want to get an X-ray," she said gently. "But before we do that, can I ask you something?" She paused, her voice steady but softer now. "The bruising pattern, it doesn't look like a fall." "Rachel, did someone do this to you?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. I sat there frozen. My father was in the waiting room just on the other side of that door. I could picture him, arms crossed, foot tapping, waiting for me to come out and play my part. She didn't push, just gave a small nod and ordered the scans. When she came back, she closed the door behind her and turned the light box on. The black and white film lit up with jagged lines where bone should have been smooth. "You have 2 ribs broken clean through," she said. "Another's fractured. These injuries came from direct, concentrated force." She took a few photographs of the bruising along my side, moving slowly, carefully. Then she looked at me again. "I'm going to ask once more. And I need you to understand I'm a mandated reporter. If I believe a crime has occurred, especially in a household where it could continue, I am legally required to report it." I kept my eyes on the X-ray. I didn't want to look at her face. I didn't want to see kindness or concern. I didn't want that crack in the wall to grow any wider. But my voice moved before I could stop it. "My brother," I said, barely more than a whisper. Tears started to come before I could hold them back. I reached out, touching her arm. "Please don't report it. Please. It'll ruin everything. He has a future. He's trying to go pro. This will destroy him." She stayed still, her voice even. "Rachel, he broke your ribs. He could have done worse. What about your future?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scold me. But the words settled in the room like something final. "I can't let this go. I won't." She filed the report. By the time my father pulled the car back into the driveway, everything had changed. A police cruiser was parked behind us, engines still running, officers on the porch. Zach was taken in for questioning that afternoon. No handcuffs, no shouting, just calm, measured questions, and a quiet ride in the back of the car. The second I stepped through the door, the temperature dropped. My mother's face twisted into something I hadn't seen before. "What did you do?" she shouted. My father grabbed my arm hard. "I told you to keep your mouth shut," he said. "You just destroyed your brother's life. I hope you're proud." But I wasn't listening anymore. Their voices came from far away like someone yelling through glass. I walked past them down the hall and into the bedroom I had never really unpacked. The suitcase was still under the bed. I pulled it out, started folding what clothes I could not, stopping to think where I'd go or what I'd do next. I just knew I wouldn't stay. I didn't have a plan when I walked out of that house, just a half-packed suitcase, a sore rib cage wrapped tight beneath my coat, and Dr. Trent's name written on a folded sticky note in my pocket. I didn't go back to my old apartment. It wasn't mine anymore, and I didn't have friends I could ask for a place to stay. Most of them had drifted off years ago, quietly edged out by my family's careful silences. What I had was the number to a women's shelter program Dr. Trent had mentioned after the x-rays. I called from a payphone outside a gas station on the edge of town. My voice shook, but the woman who answered didn't rush me. They didn't have space at the main shelter, but they connected me with a subsidized apartment on the far side of the city. A basement-level studio with chipped linoleum floors, one lamp, and a tiny bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. I signed the lease with a shaky hand and moved in that same night. It wasn't much, but the lock on the door worked and nobody yelled from the next room. That was enough. The first few days blurred together. I slept in short stretches, always waking at the smallest sound convinced someone was at the door. The bruising had spread across my side in deep purple patches. Breathing hurt less than before, but every movement reminded me what had happened. I kept the blinds drawn, sat on the floor, most of the time my back against the wall, and tried not to think about what I'd left behind. The messages started that same week. My phone lit up with voicemails and texts. My mother's voice tearful, accusing. "You're tearing this family apart, Rachel. You're making it worse." My father blunt and angry. "If you go through with this, don't bother calling us again." And Zach, though, I couldn't tell if it was really him. The words felt too polished. "I'm sorry, Rach. I wasn't myself that night. Let's talk." I deleted that one without listening to the end. Dr. Trent checked in by email. Short messages at first, just letting me know she'd followed through with the report and filed all the paperwork. Then longer ones offering names of support groups, legal aid clinics, and a therapist who worked with trauma survivors. I read them all late at night when the apartment felt too quiet. Eventually, I called one of the numbers she gave me and made an appointment. The lawyer's name was Sarah. She wore thick glasses and always had her sleeves rolled up like she was about to get to work fixing something. She asked questions without flinching, clear, direct questions about what happened that night, about the pattern of harm, about what I wanted from the legal process. I didn't know how to answer most of them. She waited anyway. Then she told me we had grounds for a restraining order, medical compensation, and emotional damages. I signed every document she put in front of me. The courthouse was a pale gray building with tall glass doors and echoes in the hallways. I sat in a stiff plastic chair outside the clerk's office, filling out forms with a pen that kept slipping through my fingers. I wrote down what Zach had done. I described the bruises, the injuries, the fear. I wrote it plainly the way Sarah taught me, just the facts, no apologies. My hand ached by the time I finished. Zach's name was flagged in the basketball league's registry within a month. The investigation stalled his draft eligibility. His contract, once celebrated by my parents with printed T-shirts and a backyard barbecue, was suspended. Sarah kept me updated as things moved forward, and I kept going to therapy. Once a week at first, then twice. I didn't talk much during those first sessions. I'd sit with my hands tucked under my legs and listen to the sound of the clock ticking. My therapist didn't push. When I did speak, I started small. About the house, The way Zach always got the last slice of cake. The time he threw a chair in the garage and nobody said anything. The day my mother told me to stop asking questions because it made Zach feel cornered. One memory would lead to another until it felt like a string had come loose, and the whole thing was unraveling in my lap. I bought a folding chair for the apartment, then a second-hand dresser, a small potted fern that sat in the windowsill. I started going to the library down the street on weekends just to be around other people. I printed out photos. One of me at the beach from a college trip, one from a Halloween party, one of my fourth-grade students holding up paper turkeys with construction paper feathers. I pinned them to the empty wall above my bed. I stopped answering unknown calls. I changed my number. I made a new email. My mother sent a letter once, handwritten, folded in half without an envelope. She must have dropped it at the door. It was 2 pages long. The first was a list of things I'd misremembered. The second was about Zach's scholarship. I didn't read the whole thing. One afternoon, I walked past the bulletin board in the library lobby and noticed a flyer for a local community grant. They were funding new programs for youth development specifically for girls from high-risk environments. I tore off one of the tabs at the bottom and stuffed it in my coat pocket. Later that night, I sat down at the kitchen counter with my laptop and started writing. I didn't know how to write a grant proposal, but I knew what I wished I'd had growing up. A space to be safe, a place where no one told you to be quiet, a program with books, snacks, warm lighting, and someone who listened. I named it The Quiet Should Speak. I worked on the draft for weeks. When I finally clicked submit, I didn't expect much, but a few months later I got a call. The grant had been approved. We held our first group session in the basement of a local church. 6 girls came that day. I brought coloring books, journals, snacks, and soft music playing from a speaker. Some of them spoke right away. Others sat with their backs to the wall and said nothing. I knew that silence. I let them have it. At night, I still woke sometimes with my heart pounding, but it passed. I'd sit up, take a sip of water, and remember the lock on the door. I'd look at the fern on the windowsill. I'd check my calendar to see which girls I'd be meeting with that week. Slowly, the space inside me that used to be filled with fear started making room for something else. The morning I got the grant confirmation email, I stared at the screen for almost 5 full minutes before it registered. The message was short, just a few lines approving funding for my proposal and requesting a signed agreement, but I read it 3 times anyway. Then I exhaled long and slow and reached for a pen. That afternoon, I walked to the corner print shop and made 10 copies of the welcome packet. I picked out a roll of purple construction paper for name tags, a few clipboards, a pack of markers, and 2 boxes of granola bars. I used an old canvas tote to carry everything to the basement of St. Luke's Church, where they'd offered me a room 2 evenings a week, rent-free. On the first day, 5 girls showed up. One of them never took off her hoodie. Another didn't speak until the 3rd week. But they came back. Every session. I didn't press them. I let them draw right sit with headphones if they needed to. Some shared stories about school or siblings or long bus rides that ended in quiet houses. I listened. That was all they really wanted, someone who didn't interrupt. The program started to grow. I adjusted the curriculum as I went, added journaling prompts, a bookshelf of donated paperbacks, a little chalkboard with a quote of the week. I named the group The Quiet Should Speak. It felt right. Every flyer I printed, every permission slip I handed out, carried those 4 words. One Thursday evening, about 4 months in, Dr. Trent stopped by. I hadn't seen her since the early court hearings, but we'd emailed now and then. She stood just inside the room watching from the doorway while the girls painted small wooden boxes they'd decorated to keep personal notes. When I walked over, she gave a quiet smile and said, "You built this." After the session ended, she helped stack chairs and gather stray paintbrushes. We talked a bit near the supply shelf voices low under the hum of the overhead lights. She mentioned a community fundraiser coming up, a small gathering at the local library with speakers and tables for outreach. "You should come," she said. "Share what you're doing. People need to hear it." I nodded slowly. The idea of standing behind a podium made my stomach tighten, but I said I'd think about it. That weekend I stayed up late organizing photos from our program. I picked out 3, one of the girls reading together on the carpet, one of a gratitude board we'd built, and one of the first day, the purple name tags taped neatly in a row. I added a few short paragraphs and printed them onto a trifold board. I borrowed a tablecloth from the church basement and used a mason jar to hold pens for our sign-up sheet. The library's community room was brighter than I expected. Rows of folding chairs faced a podium and booths lined the walls. There were tables for literacy programs, mentorship networks, food banks, and local counselors. I set up near the back, close to the exit, just in case I needed air. A few people stopped by early on. A mother with her teenage daughter asked how to enroll. A retired teacher offered to donate supplies. Around midday, one of the event coordinators approached and asked if I'd be willing to speak for a few minutes before lunch. "Just talk about your work," she said. 5 minutes is fine." I held the microphone with both hands to keep them steady. My voice sounded thin at first, but I stayed focused on the note cards. I talked about the girls, about why the program mattered. I didn't mention my past. I didn't need to. It was already in the room, quiet but present. I was just finishing when the double doors at the back opened fast, too fast for a room that size. Heads turned. I looked up and saw him. Zach. He stood in the doorway scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked thinner, hair a little longer, jacket too big in the shoulders. But the way his jaw was set, it hadn't changed. "You," he said loud enough to cut through the quiet. "You did this." I didn't move. A few people looked at me. Others looked at him. My pulse picked up, but I didn't sit down. "You ruined my life," he said, stepping forward. "All because of a stupid fall." I let the silence settle. I didn't go back to the podium. Instead, I walked forward, stopping at the edge of the aisle. My hands were loose at my sides. I turned slightly so the room could see both of us. "This," I said, my voice even, "is the man who broke my ribs." No one moved. No one spoke. I let the words hang there just for a moment. Then I added, "And this is the family who told me to stay quiet." The weight of that sentence seemed to fill the room. Zach looked like he wanted to speak, but nothing came. A pair of security guards moved in, no rush, no force, just calm steps and quiet direction. He didn't resist. Just let them guide him toward the exit, eyes still locked on mine. I didn't return to the podium. Someone else came up to close the session. I gathered my things from the table. The mason jar tipped over, but I caught it before it fell. That night, I didn't check the news. I didn't scroll through messages. I folded the trifold board and put it in the corner of my apartment. I made tea and sat near the window watching headlights move past on the street below. After the fundraiser, things got quiet again. Not in the way they had been before. This was a different kind of quiet. Steady, unsettled, but not fearful. I didn't hear from Zach, not directly, but the emails started to trickle in. Messages from old neighbors, distant relatives, even a former teacher. They all said the same thing in different ways. "We didn't know. We're thinking of you." I read each one, then filed them away in a folder I didn't name. The next meeting with Sarah was short. She had already drafted the paperwork for the civil case. Assault, medical costs, emotional damages. She laid it all out in a neat stack and handed me a pen. The forms had my name on them in clean type just under the case number. She told me this wouldn't be quick, that most cases like this weren't. But it was strong, she said. Everything was in place. I signed every page. Filing that suit was the first time I ever put my name next to his in writing without hiding behind the word incident or the phrase family matter. It didn't feel brave. It just felt necessary. I left the courthouse alone that afternoon. It was drizzling, and I hadn't brought an umbrella. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop with the hem of my jeans wet around my ankles. That week, I brought donuts to the girls' group. We were talking about boundaries, and one of the younger ones asked if setting boundaries made you mean. I paused a moment before answering. "No," I said. "It means you know what matters to you." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. We moved on to decorating affirmation jars, folding up strips of paper with kind things written in marker. I folded one myself, slipped it into my coat pocket before I left. "You deserve safe places." That's what it said. The court summons reached Zach through his lawyer. Sarah received the reply a few days later. No settlement offer, no apology, just formal language denying all charges. We expected it. Still reading the response made something tighten in my chest. The words were cold, dismissive, designed to shift the weight back onto me. My mother sent a letter. No return address, no salutation. Just a page and a half written in rushed, uneven handwriting. It was mostly about Zach's future, about how I was hurting the family name. She wrote the word loyalty 3 times. I folded the letter, slid it into the back of a drawer, and didn't read it again. The first court hearing was a procedural one. Nothing would be decided that day. Sarah told me I didn't have to speak. Just sit, listen, be present. I wore a dark sweater and pressed slacks, the kind of outfit I used to pick for school picture day. I sat on the left side of the courtroom next to Sarah with my hands folded in my lap. Zach was across the aisle, jaw set, suit jacket stretched too tight across his shoulders. He didn't look at me. His lawyer spoke first. Sarah took notes. I watched the judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a clip, nod slowly and ask for documentation. The words floated around the room like wind through a tunnel. Intent, harm, medical record, credibility. I didn't flinch even when they questioned my version of the night. Afterward, Sarah turned to me in the hallway and said, "We're moving forward." I nodded. That was enough. Back at home, I washed the dishes and swept the floors. I organized the supply bins for the girls' group, made a new sign-in sheet, and printed a fresh set of reflection prompts. I didn't talk about the court case during sessions. The girls didn't ask. But one evening as we packed up, one of the older ones lingered behind. "Miss Rachel," she said, "how do you know when it's okay to stop being afraid?" I looked at her then down at the table where her colored pencil sat rolling back and forth. I waited a beat before answering. "I think when you're tired of giving your fear all the space." She nodded once, slow and thoughtful, then zipped her backpack and left without another word. By spring, the case had picked up traction. More filings, discovery, a date set for depositions. I kept going to therapy. I kept showing up to work. I still startled at loud sounds, but less often. I still checked the door twice at night. That part hadn't changed. Then one morning, I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet. A typed apology. From Zach. Short, no signature, no envelope glue, just folded once, then slipped into my home. I brought it to Sarah. She skimmed it and handed it back. "Keep it," she said, "but don't count on it." I nodded. I didn't need to. The court date was 4 weeks away. The courthouse felt colder that day. Not the temperature, just the air. Still, quiet. Like everything in the room had settled into place and was waiting for the next move. Sarah and I sat in the second row. I kept my coat folded neatly across my lap, hands resting on top of it. She leaned in and said, "We'll start with testimony. You don't have to say anything unless you're called, but stay present. Let them see you." Across the aisle, Zach sat beside his attorney. His jaw was tight. He glanced once in my direction, then didn't look again. The judge entered, same silver hair as before, same calm voice. She greeted both sides, then outlined the morning's procedure. It was time for statements. Zach's attorney went first. He walked the court through a version of the story I barely recognized, one where emotions had run high, where words had been exchanged, where misunderstandings got out of hand. He referenced Zach's athletic record, his potential, his clean past. Then he paused, looked toward the bench, and said, "We believe the injury was unintentional. Regrettable, but not criminal." Sarah didn't respond. Not yet. When her turn came, she stood and moved slowly to the center of the room. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't pace or gesture. She just spoke. She described the kitchen, the countertop, the x-rays. She read directly from the emergency report, then showed the photographs Dr. Trent had taken the morning after. She handed the judge a sealed envelope containing the apology letter Zach had slipped under my door. When she finished, there was a pause, just a few seconds, long enough for everything to settle again. The judge asked if I'd be willing to answer a few questions. I nodded once. Sarah looked at me carefully, then motioned for me to take the stand. The walk felt longer than it was. I kept my shoulders square, my steps even. I sat, adjusted the microphone, and folded my hands on the table in front of me. The judge asked if I remembered the date of the incident. I did. She asked what happened when I arrived at the clinic. I told her what I told Dr. Trent. I told her what I hadn't told anyone before then. She asked one final question. "Did anyone in your household attempt to stop or report the harm done to you?" I paused, then answered clearly, "No." They asked me to lie. No one interrupted. No one objected. Later that afternoon, both attorneys met privately with the judge in her chambers. Sarah came back 20 minutes later and sat beside me quietly. She opened her folder, pulled out a form, and slid it over. "They're offering a settlement," she said. "It's not everything we asked for, but it's public. It includes an admission of fault, and it keeps your right to speak about it." I read the first few lines slowly. The amount was printed clearly at the bottom. I looked at Sarah. She waited, then said, "If you want to keep going, we can. But this is real accountability, and it's on your terms." I picked up the pen. That evening, I took the bus home. It was early spring. The sun was setting in soft bands through the window. I held the folder on my lap, fingers pressed against the edge. When I unlocked my apartment, the air smelled faintly of rosemary. I'd left a small pot of soup warming on the stove. I turned it off, set the folder on the table, and poured myself a glass of water. The envelope with the court seal sat beside the plant on my windowsill. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. The next day, I told the girls at group that we'd be making personal strength collages, old magazines, scissors, glue sticks. I brought poster board in 4 colors and a stack of blank index cards. One of the girls held up a cutout that said "Enough" in bold red letters. She asked if she could use it for her centerpiece. I said yes. 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, a reporter called the community center. She left a message asking if I'd be open to talking about The Quiet Should Speak. She said she'd heard about the court case through public records, but that her interest wasn't in the legal details. It was in how the program started. I sat with that message for a day. Then another. When I finally called her back, I kept my voice steady. I told her I wasn't interested in telling the full story, but I could talk about the work we were doing, the girls, the space we'd created. She respected that. She came to our next session, sat quietly in the corner of the room while the girls worked on a mural across the back wall. A week later, the article went up on the local news site. It was simple, about a woman starting a small program to support young girls affected by trauma. It mentioned a high-profile family dispute but didn't go into names. My photo was included, me standing in front of the bookshelf with my hand resting on a stack of journals. The next morning, my email inbox was full. Some were from other shelters asking about curriculum. A few were from schools looking to partner. But a handful, just a few, came from people who knew, people from back then. One message was from a woman who used to live down the street. She remembered me as the quiet kid who always brought in the mail. Another was from Zach's old coach, who wrote that he'd always known something felt off and wished he'd asked more questions. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just said he was sorry he hadn't stepped in. Then there was a letter, no envelope this time, just a single page folded into thirds and dropped at the community center's front desk. My name written across the front in careful print. It was from my mother. She said she'd seen the article, that she'd read it twice, that she still didn't understand why I'd chosen to make everything public, but also that something in the picture, the bookshelf, the notebooks, the girls had unsettled her. She wrote that Zach had moved out of state, that my father wasn't speaking to anyone, that the house was quiet now. The last sentence just said, "If you ever want to talk, I'm still here." I read it once, folded it back up, then slid it into the bottom drawer of the supply cabinet beneath the construction paper. The girls and I were preparing for our spring showcase, small displays for parents and staff with artwork and journals arranged on long tables. I had printed a short program, picked up juice boxes and snacks, and brought in a basket of postcards they could decorate as thank you notes for volunteers. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind to sweep. The mural was finished wide brush strokes of sky and trees' handprints forming a path across the bottom. One of the girls had painted the words, "We get to speak now," in blue across the top. I stood there a while, letting the room go quiet. Then I turned out the lights and locked the door behind me. I didn't hear from my parents again after that letter. There was no apology, no real acknowledgement of what happened. Just those last words, "I'm still here." I didn't answer. I didn't tear it up either. I just let it be. Some things don't need to be resolved to be finished. Spring turned to summer. The group kept growing. We had to move to a larger room at the community center, one with windows that looked out over a patch of grass and an old oak tree. The girls liked to sit near it after sessions, just on the edge of the sidewalk, passing notes and braided strings. I didn't stop them. Every now and then someone would ask how the group started. I'd say it came from a quiet place, a place where too many people didn't listen, and one person finally did. That was usually enough. Doctor. Trent came by once in June just to check in. She brought a stack of new journals and a pack of felt-tip pens. We sat in the back for a while watching the girls work through a reflection exercise. She didn't say much, just looked around the room, nodded a little and said, "You built something strong here." I thanked her, but I didn't say more. I think we both understood. The court settlement covered my medical costs and then some. I didn't buy anything big. I didn't move. I added shelves to my apartment. I bought a better chair for my desk. I started setting aside funds for a second program, something for middle school girls who were aging out of our group. I gave it a working name, but I didn't file anything official. I was still letting it take shape. There were still hard days. Some nights I'd wake up in that brief, hollow moment where your mind forgets where you are. But then I'd roll over and see the fern on the windowsill, or the program binder on the side table, and the air would come back to me. People sometimes talk about closure like it's something you get, a box that finally snaps shut. For me, it was quieter than that. It was the morning I opened the group room early and found one of the girls already inside setting up chairs without being asked. It was the moment I realized I hadn't thought about that kitchen floor in weeks. It was the soft click of the lock on my apartment door each night, and the knowledge that no one had a key but me. Zach disappeared from the headlines. Moved states, changed leagues. I didn't follow where he ended up. My parents stayed in that house, the one with the front porch and the beige siding. As far as I know, the trophy shelf is still there, but I didn't go back. I didn't ask for anything more from them. They didn't lose a daughter. They gave one away. And I walked out, not loud, not angry, just steady, with a bag in one hand and a name in the other. And I kept walking until I built something better. If you've ever been told to stay quiet or asked to shrink so someone else could shine, I want you to know your voice is still yours. Even if it shakes, even if it took years to find. You don't need permission to be safe. You don't need a crowd to be right. Just one step, then another. That's all it ever took. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know you were here. Feel free to leave a comment or share it with someone who might need it. And thank you for listening.